Okay, in this video, I am going to go through the structures of the heart that you're responsible for learning for your heart practical. This is going to follow your word list. The first structure in your word list, so we're looking at the heart here, the heart model from an anterior view. The first structure to identify is the superior vena cava. We see the superior vena cava right here. The next structure to identify is the inferior vena cava. To be able to see the inferior vena cava in this heart model, we are going to turn the model around and we see this opening here. There would be a large vein draining the lower half of the body, all the structures below the diaphragm, and that vessel is the inferior vena cava. The coronary sinus is a vein that lies on the posterior aspect of the heart. Okay, so this is the coronary sinus. The next structure in your word list is the right atrium. To see the right atrium well, we want to take the front part of the heart model off, and we're able to see all the chambers, the valves, etc. inside. The right atrium, or the right upper chamber, is this chamber here. The tricuspid valve is this valve here that connects the right atrium to this lower chamber down below, which is the right ventricle. The next structure to identify is the pulmonary semilunar valve. The pulmonary semilunar valve is this valve here. This valve separates the right ventricle from this vessel here, which is the pulmonary trunk. The pulmonary trunk bifurcates or splits into two arteries. This is the left pulmonary artery, and the right pulmonary artery is going to travel behind this arched vessel here. And to see it, we kind of need to spin the heart model around. This is going to be our right pulmonary artery. So left pulmonary artery is here, right pulmonary artery is there. The next structure to identify are pulmonary veins, or the next structures. Pulmonary veins are these vessels here that are draining blood back into this left upper chamber. So these would be the left pulmonary veins. The right pulmonary veins, again, to be able to see them, we need to flip the heart model around. These are our right pulmonary veins. The next structure to identify is the left atrium. That is this left upper chamber here. The bicuspid or mitral valve is the next structure on your word list. That is this valve here, separating the left atrium from the left ventricle. The left ventricle, as I just noted, is this lower left chamber here. The left ventricle, the next structure to identify after that is the aortic semilunar valve, and the aortic semilunar valve is this valve here, and that valve is going to separate this lower left chamber, that left ventricle, from this large artery here, which is the aorta. So again, the aortic semilunar valve. The aortic arch we see here, so this vessel is the aorta, and as it arches up and over the top part of the heart, that is the aortic arch. This part of the aorta here, so as blood leaves the left ventricle and travels through this valve, it goes into this part of the aorta, which is the ascending aorta. This is the arch of the aorta, and then we see as blood passes through the arch, it travels through this part of the aorta, which is the descending aorta. This is going to carry blood through the thoracic cavity and down toward the abdomen. The next structure to identify in your word list are coronary arteries. You can see the beginning of the coronary arteries here. So this would be the beginning of the right coronary artery, and this would be the beginning of the left coronary artery. The right and left coronary arteries are vessels that are carrying oxygen and nutrients to the heart tissue. Here we see the right coronary artery, and here we see a branch of the left coronary artery. The left coronary artery actually runs behind the pulmonary trunk before splitting into a few different branches, one of which runs across or in between the right and the left ventricles, the anterior superficial part of the heart. The next structure to identify in your word list is chordae tendineae. So chordae tendineae, to be able to see these structures, we need to take the front part of the heart model off. We see the chordae tendineae here. These are tendinous structures that connect the bicuspid and tricuspid valves, two small projection-like muscles that sit in the base or in the floor of both ventricles. The trabeculocarnae, so these ridges of muscular tissue that are found in the lining the internal part of both ventricles are the trabeculocarnae. So we can see that here. The apex and the base of the heart. The apex of the heart is this part of the heart here, so where it kind of makes a point or an apex. The base is the opposite part of the apex. So my hand is holding the base of the heart, where this would be the apex of the heart. The interventricular septum. A septum is a term that's used for a wall that separates two spaces. This wall, this muscular wall here, is an interventricular septum separating the right and the left ventricles. The interatrial septum is the next structure on your word list. The interatrial septum, we see part of the interatrial septum here and part of the interatrial septum here. So again, there's going to be a muscular wall separating those two upper chambers or the two atria. The right and left auricles, to be able to see these structures, we need to put the front part of the heart back on. These large flaps of tissue that help to increase the volume of the right and left atria are auricles. So this is the left auricle, and that is the right auricle. The anterior interventricular artery, also known as the left anterior descending, that is this artery here. So this branch of the left coronary artery that comes off of the base of the aorta. The left coronary artery runs behind the pulmonary trunk and provides a couple of branches, one of which runs down the anterior aspect of the heart. That's the anterior interventricular, also known as the left anterior descending artery. The great cardiac vein is going to be running right next to that left anterior descending artery. Okay, so off of the arch of the aorta, we see there are three arteries that branch off of the arch of the aorta. This one here that is the first one to branch is the brachiocephalic artery, sometimes known as the brachiocephalic trunk. This artery here, the second one to branch, is the left common carotid artery. And then finally, this third one to branch is the left subclavian artery. The next structure to identify is a papillary muscle on your word list. And the papillary muscle are these muscular projections in the base of each ventricle that is connected to a chordae tendineae and ultimately connected to the bi and tricuspid valves. Next structure to identify is the ligamentum arteriosum. The ligamentum arteriosum, we can see here, is a ligament that connects the pulmonary trunk and the aortic arch. The final two structures to identify are the ascending and descending aorta. I already pointed these out, but I'll do that again. This part of the aorta is the ascending aorta. This part is the descending aorta, and this is the arch of the aorta. This is called ascending because as blood leaves the left ventricle and enters the aorta, it ascends or travels upward. It arches over through the arch of the aorta, and then it moves through the descending aorta to travel down through the thorax.